All right, we're recording. As usual for attendance, you guys just need to send me an email with the keywords that I'm going to say throughout the lecture. If you miss the cutoff, though, like if I post the video with the questions and you haven't sent me the words yet, then it is too late for the words, and you'll have to do the questions. But you guys are here early, so Hamrick, Bunch, White, Ramsey, and Davis, when you email me this morning to tell me and give me the keywords, remind me that you were here early, and I will give you some extra credit on your attendance for being early.
Bet.
So since we are early and since we are recording, do you guys have any questions about anything? All right. I guess I'll just do reminders now. That way people who come in later can watch at least the beginning of the video to get the reminders, and we can knock it out. So we could just start with the new material once 8 o'clock starts. But anyway, yeah, the exam is going to be on Monday. I'll talk more about that actually a little bit after 8, because there are some of these announcements I would definitely want to make sure everybody hears. But yes, the exam will be on Monday. I hope to have – actually, you know what? No, I don't want to give that announcement yet. I do want to wait until 8, because some people, they might get here right on time, and I don't blame them. They might say, well, I was here on time, so I don't need to watch the video. So I'll hold off on those announcements. So yeah, let's go back to questions. Does anybody have any questions? All right, some, I guess, less important announcements maybe. I'll remind you that the lab for this week for the biological molecules experiment that you did this week, that is due tonight. It's due Friday. As always, if you need help, let me know. You can visit me during office hours. Maybe we can find a time outside of office hours, and I can help you through it. Because remember, labs are not exams. I'm not there to test to see what you know. Labs are there for you to get some work done and practice, using what you've learned. So if you need help, let me know. And on that note, to remind you, the pre-lab for next week is due on Sunday. And again, you don't have to do it alone. So if you need help, meet me during office hours or find a different time to meet me. And I'll be glad to help you get your lab done and help you with your pre-lab. Another good announcement would be independent work. As a reminder, your third week of independent work is due on Sunday. Let me take a look here. So make sure I'm telling you the right thing with the points. By the end of this week, you should have 21.6 points of independent work. All right. I think that's it for the basic announcements. Again, I'm going to give the exam announcements once 8 o'clock hits, because I don't want anybody to miss that. But does anybody have any questions about the material or the course in general? All right, one last reminder then, and I'm probably preaching to the choir at this point, because if you're here and you're watching this, or either live or you're watching the video, you probably have a good idea of what's going on in this class. But if you're trying to get caught up and you feel overwhelmed, obviously my first piece of advice is to meet me for office hours so I can help you. But other than that, my best piece of advice is to go to the Google Classroom, go to the stream, and just look at everything I've posted from the beginning of the class, from day one. Just go through it chronologically, because I've pretty much sent out announcements for everything you need to do. For this day, watch this video. Don't forget, this is due on Sunday. This is due on Friday, right? So if you go through those announcements, hopefully that'll help you get caught up. Anyway, it's 8 o'clock. So now we are officially started. So with the fact that we're officially started, I'll go ahead and remind you for attendance, you need to send me the keywords. If I don't get the keywords by the time I post the video and the questions, then you have to do the video and the questions. So make sure you get me the attendance keywords. The first attendance keyword is going to be Bigfoot, like that mythical creature that they say lives, the big ape-like creature, Bigfoot. Anyway, really quick announcements. On Monday, we're going to do the first exam. It's going to come to you online. It'll look just like the study guides because it'll be a multiple choice thing where you go in and, you make choices and then you hit the submit button. So what you'll need to do is sometime before 8 o'clock, just log into your computer or whatever device you have and keep an eye on your email because the exam is going to post automatically. It's supposed to post at 8, but I'm going to schedule it to post a little bit earlier than that just to make sure at the very latest it gets there at 8. And then you can start it as early as you want. So as soon as you see that exam pop up in your email, go ahead and start it. You have to finish it by 8:50 a.m. because anything after that, you're going to lose 10 points per minute that you're late. So if you finish it at 8:51 and you got a 100%, then I'm still going to have to dock 10 points and you're going to end up with a 90. So don't be late. What else to say about the exam? Oh, yeah, the exam review. So I want to say today after office hours. So today at 11 o'clock, I'm going to hold an exam review. And you guys are all invited. You don't have to be there if you don't want to, but I'm going to go through as many questions as I can from the study guides because remember, those questions are the questions that I'm going to use to write the exam. So if you want to come, if I were you, I would go through those study guides and figure out which questions you need help on because I don't know if I have time to go through every single question on every single study guide. So it would be helpful if you could do the study guides beforehand. And again, the study guides are what I'm using to write the exam. So if you want to prepare for the exam, do the study guides. Then the last thing I could say about the exam, or last two things, it's obviously going to cover chapters 1, 2, and 3. So today we're going to cover chapter 5, but that will not be on the first exam. The first exam is only going to cover chapters 1, 2, and 3. And if you know you're going to have issues taking the exam on Monday online, then you need to contact me this week so we can figure something out. Or if you think you're going to need more than 50 minutes to take the exam, again, you need to contact me this weekend so we can work something out. And we'll have to meet like we are right now, except you'll have to have your camera on and your microphone on. If I can see you and I can see your screen and I can hear you and I can ensure that you're taking a closed book exam, then I don't care how long it takes you to take the exam. So I'll give you more than 50 minutes if you need it. So email me if you need that. And that's it. Any questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that study thing is that in person or is that online?
Good question. Unfortunately for now, everything is going to be online until you hear otherwise from me. I think my whole family is better now, but then I have to follow the protocols. So hopefully we'll be back in person next week. But for right now, everything is online. So until you hear otherwise from me, everything will be online.
All right.
Great question. All right. Any other questions?
Yeah, I got one.
Yeah.
Are we having class Monday?
Yes. Unless you ever hear otherwise from me, we'll always have class every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and we will always have lab every Monday and Wednesday. And currently, unless you hear otherwise from me, that class is going to be online like it is right now.
All right, thank you.
No problem. And I hate it. I really wish that we could get back in person, and I'm hoping it'll be soon. But for now, I'm going to say it is online. It depends on how everybody tests in my family. Any other questions? Those are good questions.
Are you going to be able to access the exam from this classroom right here that we're in, or do we have to minimize this and go find the exam and then pop this back up or something?
Great question. And you may have clarified what Mason was trying to ask, and I was too dumb to notice. So I'm sorry. On Monday, good grief, I'm so sorry, Mason. On Monday, since it's an exam day, I will be here on this Google Classroom if you need me, but you don't have to be. I'm so sorry. So yeah, log in if you want, or don't if you don't want to. But yeah, I will be here. That way, if you're reading it and you're like, hey, can you clarify this question? And I'm here for that. Just like it would be in a regular exam where, sometimes you might need my help. So yes, I will be here on this regular link on Monday, and the rest of you do not have to be. So great question, Aaron and Mason. I assume that's probably what you were trying to ask, and I'm sorry I missed it. So does that clear everything up for everybody? You don't have to be on here when you take the exam. Just make sure you're sometime before 8 o'clock, you're keeping an eye on your email, because when the exam posts, that's where you're going to see it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, guys. Great questions. Anything else? All right. Well, if you think of something after I start chapter 5, feel free to interrupt me and say, hey, I forgot. I just thought of a question. Feel free to let me know. Let's see. Okay. So I've already given the first word for attendance. We'll move forward. I'll give the other one shortly. Here we go. Can someone confirm that you can see the...
Yes.
Okay, and you can hear me, obviously. Okay, so here we are, chapter 5. You'll notice that we have skipped chapter 4. I highly recommend reading chapter 4, but you don't necessarily have to. Chapter 4 is all about the parts of a cell, like the nucleus and the lysosomes and the smooth ER and the rough ER and all those parts. And it certainly wouldn't hurt you to read that. But the reason we skip it is because basically the first half of the semester, we're talking about cellular processes. So you're going to learn all about the cell in chapters 5, chapter 6, chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 10. You're going to learn all about it. So that's the reason we're skipping it. You're going to learn different aspects of how the cells work in these upcoming chapters. So to save time and effort, we're going to go ahead and skip chapter 4. But again, I highly recommend reading it, even though you don't have to. So here we go, chapter 5. Well, hold on, let me say this too. You'll see this is called the working cell. And I'll go ahead and tell you right now, chapters 5, chapter 6, and chapter 7, that's what's going to make up the next exam. And almost entirely, the next exam is going to be all about energy. So if you remember back in chapter 1, we talked about the properties of life, like what makes something alive. And one of the things we talked about was the fact that life needs energy. And then we have to process energy and change it from one form to another. And that is basically what this next exam is about. And that will probably be a test question on exam 2. Like, what is this exam about? And the answer is energy, or the transformation of energy. Anything that has to do with energy, that is going to be the answer. So here we go. Keep that in mind as we move forward. And here we go. Does anybody know? Can anybody guess? Let's see. Actually, does anybody even know? Yeah, you can probably know what this is. So this guy's in a hazmat suit, right? He's blocked off here. He's got a little gas mask on. Any idea what this might have anything to do with cellular functions? Any guesses? That's okay. I think it would be more appropriate if the guy wasn't wearing, or girl, who knows, if the person wasn't wearing a yellow hazmat suit and maybe was wearing mop gear from the military, because I think if I remember correctly, what your book is getting at is this person is protecting themselves from nerve gas. And your book says something like, well, at the end of this chapter, you're going to know why nerve gas is deadly. And that's true. You will know why it's deadly. Not that that matters for the grand scheme of biology, but I don't know. Your book chose to introduce the chapter that way. How about this? We got a picture of a pizza and a picture of some people walking. This is actually, these two go together. Any idea what these two things might have to do with each other? If you're thinking about cellular functions. No guesses?
The pizza gives you energy.
Yeah, exactly. Specifically, the way your book puts it is when you eat, you are getting a certain number of calories, right? You're taking calories in. And when you exercise, you are burning calories. So your book just points out that through this chapter, you're going to learn a little bit more about what a calorie is and how calories work and how they're measured and things like that. So, and then we have these two pictures. We've got some raisins, which, as I'm sure you know, are basically dehydrated grapes. And we have some beef jerky, which I'm sure, as you know, is dehydrated meat. And one of the things you're going to learn about in this chapter is one of the processes. I mean, I'm not going to give you the recipe for grapes and beef jerky, but you're going to learn about one of the processes that makes this happen. When we talk about dehydration, there's actually a cellular process that makes that happen, and we're going to learn about it. So here we go. As always, your textbook starts each chapter with this biology and society. And as always, I will skip it. And as always, I recommend reading it, even though you don't have to. Your book is just trying to give you a current example of why this chapter is relevant to you, but I'm going to skip it. If there's anything that you would need to know, we're going to talk about it later anyway, is this word right here. Whoops. Basically, and this you're going to learn this later, but you need to know that cells generate energy, and that energy, as far as we're concerned, is called ATP. As a matter of fact, if there's anything from this chapter that you should memorize, forget everything. Well, don't forget everything else, but the most important thing you can get from this chapter, as far as the exam is concerned, is that cells need energy, and the form of energy that they need is something called ATP, and you're going to learn about ATP in this chapter. So yeah, know that cells need energy. Cells need something called ATP. Just like your cars need energy, and they need it in the form of gasoline, most of them. Or your house needs energy, and it needs it in the form of electricity, right? This is what we mean. Cells need energy, and they need it in the form of something called ATP. And yes, cells make it. They make it in a process called glycolysis, but we're going to learn all about that in a different chapter. So for now, you don't have to worry about it. Your book talks about how there's enzymes that are responsible for making that ATP, and how they use those enzymes to actually power a little nano robot. But again, that's nothing you need to know for the exam, because I am going to skip this portion of the chapter. This is a good little introduction, though, even though I'm not going to test you on it. It's a good introduction to what we're going to be talking about in this chapter. Cells control their chemical environment, meaning, a cell, the inside of a cell is obviously going to be different than the outside of a cell. Cells are in control of what's on the inside of their cell. That's one of those things that makes us alive, right? That's one of those properties of life, is that regulation. So how do cells go about this regulation? Well, energy is needed. And again, we'll talk about the type of energy, which is ATP. So we have to have energy for cells to regulate. And again, remember, that is a property of life. So that's why it's important. Cells need enzymes to control their environment. And you're going to learn all about enzymes. You've been introduced to them in the last chapter when we talked about proteins. There was a slide where I showed you the 5 different types of proteins, and one of them was enzymes. And I said the enzymes will be very important later. So here we go. This is when the enzymes are coming back. And then, of course, there's something called the plasma membrane, which is what the outside of the cell was. And if we didn't skip chapter 4, you would already be familiar with that. But yeah, so these 3 things allow cells to control their environment, to regulate their environment, right? So without these 3 things, there wouldn't be life on Earth. That's why these things are important. And we're going to learn about these 3 things in this chapter. And yeah, again, like your book points out here, the 3 processes common to all living cells: energy metabolism, aka transforming energy from one form to another; the use of enzymes; and the transport regulation by the plasma membrane, meaning things just don't come in and out of your cell willy-nilly, right? The plasma membrane, which makes up the outside of your cell, it kind of dictates what can come in and out of your cell. So again, nothing on this slide is necessarily going to be on the exam. It's just a good introduction to what we're about to talk about. Are there any questions so far? All right. And yeah, so your chapter always has a chapter thread that they always bring this back to, and this particular chapter thread is nanotechnology. And as far as the exam is concerned, that is not important. But again, I teach out of the book, so I wanted to include that so you can follow along with your book if you wanted to. So here we go. Now we're getting into the meat and potatoes of chapter 3. Chapter 3 is broken down into 3 main bullet points. The first one is some basic energy concepts. After that, we're going to talk about ATP, like I already mentioned, and cellular work. And then we're going to talk about enzymes. And excuse me, I said 3, but it's actually 4 main bullet points, because after enzymes, we're going to talk about membrane function. So here we go. First, let's talk about some basic energy concepts. And hopefully this is going to be a review. Hopefully you guys already know a lot of this stuff because you've heard it your whole life. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the conservation of energy. But before we can talk about the conservation of energy, we need to define energy. And you do need to know what this word is for the exam. I'm not really big on vocabulary words. I'd prefer to give you examples and have you be able to understand something from an example. But some words you do need to define, and this is one of them. Energy is the capacity to cause change. So think about it. If you want to change the temperature in your house, that requires energy. If you want to change your position from sitting on the couch to, I don't know, sitting on your toilet, right? That requires energy for you to get from that one place to another, for you to change positions, right? So anytime you cause change, that requires energy. That's what you need to know for the exam. Energy is the capacity to cause change. And again, to remind you, when I say for the exam, we're talking about the next exam, because this chapter 5 will not be on exam 1. But anyway, your book also gets a little bit specific and mentions that some forms of energy are used to perform work, such as moving an object against an opposing force, which is why I have this picture. This person's, trying to roll that rock up the hill. So that is performing work. And that the object is the rock. The opposing force would be gravity and friction. So any questions about what energy is, the definition of energy? All right. There are two basic types of energy. Now, there's a lot of different types of energy if you really get down to it, like electric energy and, nuclear energy, blah, 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 blah. But what it all really boils down to, and what you need to know for the exam, and you probably already know this, are the two basic types of energy. Does anybody know, or can you guess what the two types of energy are? And forget for a second that you're sitting in a college class right now. Imagine we're talking to middle schoolers. What would the answer be if we're asking middle schoolers, what are the two types of energy?
Kinetic and potential.
Perfect. And you need to know that. Yes, kinetic energy is the energy of motion. And potential energy, that's basically stored energy. There's not much to say about kinetic energy. I think everybody's very familiar with that. So if you get hit in the face with a baseball, that hurts because of the kinetic energy, right? That is the energy of motion. That baseball was moving. Potential energy, again, that's stored energy. So if I'm holding a baseball, if I'm, I don't know, standing on top of Hamlin Hall and I'm just holding a baseball ready to drop it to the ground, it has potential energy, right? Because I'm holding it. And as a matter of fact, the higher I hold it, the more potential energy it has, right? Because it has more potential. It's going to move faster before it hits the ground, right? The higher I get. So I'm pretty sure everyone's familiar with these concepts of kinetic energy and potential energy. Here's where it might get a little bit new to you. Let me put a little line right here. I'm pretty sure everyone's familiar with this idea of potential energy is the stored energy that an object has due to its location. Again, like I said, if I hold the baseball a little bit higher up, it has a little bit more potential energy. But here's the part which I think people are a little bit less familiar with, but is more important as far as this semester is concerned. Potential energy is also stored energy that an object has due to its structure. And this goes back to something I've said a couple of times when we were talking about molecules and chemistry. As far as we're concerned in this class, and you can think of it this way, it's not 100% accurate, but to understand the concepts of this course, it's good enough. Basically, however much energy it takes to build something is how much energy will be released when you break that thing. Specifically, I'm talking about molecules. So when we talked about, octane and fatty acids, right? However much energy it took to put those atoms together to build that molecule, that energy is then ready to be released when you break it. So that's what we mean by stored energy due to its structure. And that's very important because that's pretty much most of the energy we're going to be talking about. We'll talk a little bit about some heat energy, which is a type of kinetic energy. But for the most part, we've already talked about it. We just didn't give it name, but we've talked about potential energy in the structure. So are there any questions about the two types of energy and, the more specific type of potential energy that we're concerned with? All right, that brings us to our next concept. It's a very simple concept, which is the conservation of energy. And you need to know that for the exam. Conservation of energy states that energy cannot be created and it cannot be destroyed. Energy is like an infinite thing. Energy can only be converted from one form to another. And again, that's important from what we learned in chapter 1, right? We said that all life requires the transformation of energy. I even used the analogy. I said almost every living thing on Earth is solar powered. However, most of it, a lot of it's not directly solar powered. Like you guys are solar powered, but you don't go outside naked when you need energy, right? When you need energy, you have to eat plants, which have they themselves directly used solar power and converted it to another form. So yes, it's all about this conversion of energy. So yeah, and that's why it's important. So are there any questions about this slide? It's chaos in here. I apologize if you guys can hear that. All right, here's a little picture your book included to kind of demonstrate this idea, the relationship between potential energy and kinetic energy. So in this cycle of people swimming and then climbing up to this diving board and then jumping off of it into the water, right? That's a cycle, and they just keep doing that. Within this cycle, the least amount of potential energy they will ever have is right here in the water, right? And then as they move higher and higher against gravity, once they use that kinetic energy to move upwards, then once they get to the highest point they're going to reach, that's when they have their greatest potential energy. And then they jump off, and that potential energy is converted to kinetic energy. So the idea here is that basically, again, we're converting one form of energy to the other. Specifically, in this case, we're converting potential energy to kinetic energy, and the kinetic energy to potential energy, and then potential energy to kinetic energy, so on and so forth. It just keeps cycling. So that's what we're saying, right? Energy, it's not created, it's not destroyed, it's just converted from one form to another. Now, imagine if you were watching this situation take place. Once this person hit the water, you could probably hear it. And that itself, not that you need to know this for the exam, but that is also a form of kinetic energy. What happens is when that person hits the water, it vibrates, right? And that vibrates the air. And then those air vibrations hit your eardrums, and that's what your brain deciphers as sound. So when you hear sound, sound is a form of kinetic energy. That is the movement of air molecules, the vibration of air molecules. Anyway, any questions about this? All right. Obviously, it's just an exam. Just an example. There won't be any questions where I say, at what point does a diver have the most potential energy or the least potential energy? It's just a question. If you download this PowerPoint, you can watch this little animation that talks about this idea of potential energy and kinetic energy. As you can imagine, when this person uses kinetic energy to draw that back, once it gets all the way back, it has the most potential energy that it's going to have. And then when he releases it and it shoots forward, all that potential energy is converted to kinetic energy. But this is a good analogy, and I'm going to come back to it, even though I'm not showing you the video. This idea of a bow and arrow, or even what do you call that thing where you pull the trigger instead? A crossbow. However much energy it takes to pull back that string is how much energy is going to be released. That's why you have things like compound bows that have all those pulleys, right? The more energy it takes to pull it back, the more energy that's going to be released when you let it go. And it's the same with chemistry, and I'm going to come back to that. Not all molecules are equal, right? Some molecules take more energy to build. And the more energy it takes to build them, generally speaking, the more energy is going to be released when you break that molecule, when you break those bonds. All right, so any questions about the conservation of energy or the different types of energy? All right, that brings us to the next attendance word, which is going to be Honda. You know, like the type of car, not a Toyota, but a Honda. And now let's talk about heat. I've already kind of hinted at this, and we've talked a little bit about it before. What is heat? Well, at the molecular level, first of all, let me say this. Sorry. Heat is a type of kinetic energy. I already mentioned that, right? Heat is the energy. It is movement. Specifically, it is the random motion of matter. So when you say that the air is getting hot here, what you're saying is that the air molecules are moving faster. Or when you say, okay, my iron skillet has cooled down, what you're saying is that the molecules of iron in that iron skillet are moving slower. That's really what heat is. Your book, and that's probably the most important thing. I put a little check mark. That's probably the most important thing that you need to know for the exam and for the semester. That is what heat is, a type of kinetic energy. It's all about those molecules moving. Your book also points out that heat is the most chaotic / disordered form of energy. That's a little bit less important as far as the semester is concerned, and I'm not going to bring it up on any exams. Here's another important concept, this third one. all energy conversions generate some heat. So when we say, again, energy can't be created or destroyed, it can only be converted from one form to another. When that happens, when you convert it from one form to another, you're going to generate some heat. It might not always be noticeable. Like, let's back it up a little bit. When this person hits the water, and I'm sure you've done this before, you've jumped into the water, you probably didn't feel it. As a matter of fact, you probably, depending on the situation, may have felt cooler depending on the temperature of the water. But that does generate some heat. When that person hits the water and that potential or that kinetic energy of their movement is converted to sound energy, and potential energy, there is a release of some heat.
Yeah.
Anyway, that brings us to, actually, before I go to the next concept, are there any questions about what heat is? All right. So the next concept, as far as this course is concerned, is less important. And the concept is entropy. Entropy is the measure of disorder or randomness in a system. Every time energy is converted from one form to another, entropy increases. Now,
No dorks in this house.
I don't know who it is, but can somebody put yourself on mute, please? So anyway, with entropy is important when you're doing like real, I hate to say it like that, but when you're doing like real chemistry and real physics, like chemical equations are not like just the ones that I've shown you so far. When you're like, all right, when you add this molecule and this molecule, you get water and that molecule. It's not always that simple. A lot of times there's math involved. So when you're using math and you're talking about chemical equations and you're converting one thing to another, then all these things have to be accounted for. And there's even the equation includes heat, but it also includes something called entropy. So when you're at that level of understanding and when you're doing like that level of chemistry, then entropy is important. But for our level of understanding, entropy is not very important. I just wanted to include it because your book included it. And I want to tell you not to worry yourself about it as far as the exam is concerned, or even the semester. You can go the whole semester not understanding what entropy is and completely understand all the concepts that we're going to learn in this book. So are there any questions about this slide before I move forward? All right, so we know about heat, which is a type of energy. Let's talk about another very, very important type of energy as far as this course is concerned anyway, chemical energy. So molecules have a form of potential energy. You probably already know that because I keep hinting at it. I keep saying however much energy it takes to build a molecule, that's how much energy is going to be released when you break it. And I use this example, and I've used it before when we were talking about chemistry at the bottom left here. And it's not 100% accurate, but it's a great way at this level of understanding biology and science. It's a great way for you to picture things. So here's a good exam review for exam 1. Can someone tell me what is on the outside of an atom? What would be, if we were drawing an atom, and I've got these rings on here, even though they don't really look like that, what would be on those rings?
Electrons.
Good. And yes, you definitely need to know that for exam 1. Electrons are on the outside. And what charge do electrons have? And you need to know this for the exam 2.
Negative.
Good. Yes. So here we have these negative things on the outside of these two atoms. Oh, that looks horrible. Now, if you're going to try to bring these two atoms together to make a molecule, and again, this isn't 100% accurate, but this is a good way for you to visualize it for this course. Those things are negative, and negative things repel each other, just like the same sides of a magnet would repel each other. So in a sense, these atoms don't want to be together. Okay, so it's going to take energy to push them together. And however much energy it takes to push them together, that's how much energy will be released in a chemical reaction when you break the bond. And again, that's not 100% accurate when we're talking about physics and real chemistry. But as far as visualizing what you need to understand for this semester, that's a good way to look at it. And again, I'm going to go back to this analogy right here. However much energy it takes to pull that string back, right? That's at that point, once you've cocked it and it's just sitting there, that's potential energy, right? And then once you pull the trigger, that potential energy is released and the arrow moves forward. So anyway, yes, that is chemical energy. It takes energy to build molecules, and that energy is ready to be released once you break the bonds of that molecule with chemical reactions. So, are there any questions about this slide? All right. This should look familiar. We've already seen this in, I believe it was chapter 3. Yeah, chapter 3. Cells and engines, internal combustion engines to be specific, use the same basic processes to make chemical energy stored in fuels available for work. So you're going to learn all about what your cells do, right? But for now, you probably really already know what internal combustion engines do, right? They take this octane, they break it down in the presence of oxygen and fire. And when that happens, right, once you break those bonds of these molecules, it releases heat, it releases energy. And that energy is used to propel your vehicle forward. And the same thing, and in the process, you produce smaller waste products, right? In the case of, well, I'll come back to it. And you're already familiar with that. And then again, it's the same thing with your cells. Your cells do the same thing. They take all these molecules that you eat, they break them down, they release energy, and they put that energy to use in other ways. And also, in both situations, one of the byproducts is heat, right? Because when you convert energy from one form to another, you release some heat. So here's everything I was saying, but with a better picture. Again, in your vehicle, you're breaking down this octane in the presence of oxygen, and that causes, and then that energy that's released is used to move your vehicle, which is a type of kinetic energy. What are the byproducts? Carbon dioxide and water. And it's the same thing when you eat glucose, for example. Good grief. Sorry about all these noises in the background. Your cell breaks down glucose in the presence of oxygen, and in the process, it converts it from one form to another. And in this case, your book needs ATP. The same way your car is after kinetic energy, your cells are after ATP. And in both situations, you're releasing heat as a byproduct. In both situations, carbon dioxide and water are byproducts as well. Now, this slide, I would say you don't need to worry about this slide as far as the exam is concerned. And in a way, you don't, because if we're going through this chronologically, you don't need to know this stuff yet, the carbon dioxide and the water and the heat. All this stuff I'm going to tell you later in chapter 6. Good grief, I'm so sorry for the noise in the background. Chapter 6 and chapter 7, you're going to learn all about this. And at that point, you definitely will need to know that the byproducts are carbon dioxide and water. But for now, I'm just introducing you to the concept. So are there any questions about this slide? Okay, my daughter does not like this, I guess. So this picture that we're talking about right here, when we break down the glucose in the presence of oxygen and as a byproduct make carbon dioxide and water because we're after ATP, that is called cellular respiration. And if you're taking notes, there is no need to write that down yet, because this right here is all about, or is going to be what chapter 6 is all about. 6 or 7? Yeah, 6. You're going to learn all about cellular respiration for right now. So for now, like I said, if you're taking notes, you just give your hand a break. You don't need to write that down. But we'll talk about it very quickly. Cellular respiration is the energy-releasing chemical breakdown of fuel molecules, which is a fancy way of saying it's when you digest the stuff you eat, right? You have these large molecules that you've eaten, and as you break them down into smaller molecules, it releases energy. And then, of course, again, where this is all about energy conversion. So your body doesn't even use that energy directly, right? When you break down the molecules that you've eaten, your body doesn't use that energy directly. Instead, it stores it in a different way that your cells can use. And we'll talk about that later as well. Here's one thing you will need to know, though. Know this number. And I'm not big on numbers, but know this one for the exam 2 to be specific. About 34% of your food energy is converted to useful work, and the rest of it is released as body heat. So think about that, right? So of all the calories you eat, only about 34% of it is actually being put to use. and I'll go ahead and give you a spoiler alert. The second bullet point, I say, you break down the food molecules to release energy, and then you store that in a form the cells can use. And once again, that's that thing called ATP. So what I'm saying here is that when you eat, only about 34% of that energy is used to produce ATP. The rest of it is released as body heat. And that's why I have this picture. This is, I think, a FLIR picture, forward-looking infrared. Basically, it's a thermal picture, right? We can see the heat being released by this human. And I'm sure you know that you release heat, and that's where the heat comes from. It's from you breaking down molecules. So any questions about this slide? All right. That is a good segue into something called food calories. And you're already familiar with this. So a lot of this is going to be a review, but some of it probably will be new to you because you probably know basically what a calorie is. But after this, you're going to know specifically what a calorie is. The next word for attendance is going to be this thing right here, burger. Like Bob's Burger, like the thing that person is eating. Burger. Actually, it's so hard to write like this. I'll do it, whatever. Burger is the next word for attendance. Anyway, let's talk about what a calorie is. And I have to be very specific here. This is a calorie with a lowercase c, and that'll be important a little bit later. But a calorie, abbreviated CAL, is the amount of energy needed to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. So 1 calorie can raise 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. And that's a very simple thing to think about. But then once you start adding different numbers to it, that's where it gets a little bit complicated. So you could say, I don't know, 100 calories could raise the temperature of 100 grams of water by 1 degree Celsius. Or you could say, I can't erase that. Anyway, or you could say 100 calories is enough to raise 1 gram of water by 100 degrees Celsius. So again, the basic definition is simple, but then once you start adding different numbers to it and thinking about the way they're all related to each other mathematically, that's where it gets a little bit complicated. So I guess just for the exam, for now, just concentrate on what that definition is. 1 calorie can raise 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. Now, here's where it gets even trickier. When you hear the word calorie, you're probably not thinking of this calorie right here with the lowercase c. Because in the United States, when we use the word calorie, we're talking about food calories with an uppercase C. And food calories with an uppercase C are actually something called kilocalories. And kilo, that prefix, means 1,000. So when you look at a nutrition label, if it says 100 calories with a big C, they'll all have a big C in the United States. If it says 100 calories, what that really means is it's 100,000 calories. So if you drink a soda that's 100 calories with a big C, aka kilocalories, what you're drinking is 100,000 calories with a small c, meaning you could raise 100,000 grams of water by 1 degree Celsius. Or you could theoretically raise 1 gram of water by 100,000 degrees Celsius, theoretically. So that's what a calorie is. And again, for the exam, just know those 2 bullet points. And I realize that might be the second one might be a little bit tricky. But if you can remember the word kilocalories, hopefully that'll help you remember, because kilo, it's in the prefix. Kilo equals 1,000. And of course, your book points out that the energy of calories are useful to fuel the activities of life, but you already knew that. So for the exam, the second exam, know these first 2 bullet points. Know what calories are with the big C and the little c. Any questions about that? All right. The study guide asks you to do some sort of conversion. There's at least one question where they're asking you about calories. And like, all right, if you eat this many calories, then how many grams of water can you raise by 10 degrees or 100 degrees or something like that? It's not going to be as straightforward as 1 gram of water by 1 calorie. It's going to be a little bit more complicated. So because of that, I added this slide. This is nothing you need to know. I'm not even going to go over it, but as you're studying it, if you're studying the slides, you can just think about this and think about all the different ways you can describe what a calorie can do. Calorie with a big C. 1 calorie, I'll talk about the first one. 1 calorie with a big C, well, we already know this one, can raise 1,000 grams of water by 1 degree Celsius, because again, 1 calorie with a big C is 1,000 calories, right? So anyway, as you're studying, you can just look over this slide and think about all the different ways you could rearrange things mathematically, but I won't spend time talking about it, at least not during the lecture. If you want to talk about it during office hours and need some more tutoring, I'd be glad to help you. Here's a little chart from your book that kind of displays some average calories. The average calories of the food, right? The average intake that you have up top, calories consumed, and at the bottom, calories burned. And of course, I say average because this is all going to be different, right? Not everybody bikes the same. They might be doing different speeds, and everybody's body is different. So this is actually a good topic for independent work if you're interested. You could write a quick paper. You can look some of this stuff up. What are some of your favorite foods, right? And figure out how many calories are in your favorite foods. And then you can think about some of the activities you do, either because you like to or because you have to, and think about how many calories you burn, or even just how many calories the average human burns doing nothing. Because even as you're sitting here doing nothing, you're still burning calories. And one of you actually has written a paper about this, and I think it was in the context of weight loss. But anyway, just something to think about for independent work if you're interested. So any questions about this slide? Okay. Let's jump into this second main bullet point. It's 8:42. Yeah, I'm going to do the introduction. So we'll talk about the beginning of this main bullet point, and then we'll be done. And then I'll be on for office hours, and again, after office hours to do the exam 1 review. Okay. Chemical energy that is released by cellular respiration is used to generate ATP. And I know when I first told you about cellular respiration, I said, don't take notes if you don't want to, because we're going to talk about this later in other chapters. But here it is again in this chapter. So I'll remind you what cellular respiration is so when you break down those molecules of the things you've eaten in the presence of oxygen, right? When you're breaking those things down and it releases energy, again, like I said back then, it is used to generate ATP. And if there's anything you should know from this chapter, it is that cells need ATP. I mean, yeah, technically for the whole exam, you will also need to know that cellular respiration produces ATP, but we're going to have a whole chapter on that one. So for right now, I would say the most important thing about this chapter, as far as the exam is concerned, is that cells need ATP, right? That is the energy that cells need. Anyway, what is ATP? You can almost think of it like rechargeable batteries for your celery. Not your celery. Rechargeable batteries for your cellular processes, for your cells. Because again, your computer needs probably DC power, right? So it's plugged into the wall, and there's a little converter. So it takes the AC power, which is electric, and turns it into a different type of electric energy, which is DC power. Plants need sun energy to do photosynthesis. Everything needs energy. Your cells need ATP. Again, I keep repeating that because it's so important. So ATP acts like energy shuttles. Again, that's the way your book says it. I like to think of it, a better way of saying it is they act like rechargeable batteries. ATP is a rechargeable battery. And when it's ATP, it's fully charged. It stores energy that is obtained from food. Another way of saying that is when you eat your food and you go through cellular respiration and you release that energy, that is what you do. That is how you recharge your battery. That's how you make the ATP. And then, as you would do with a battery, when you need it, you use it, right? So you store this food, you have all this ATP in your cells, and as your cells are doing work and they need the energy, they just use the ATP up, just like they would batteries. So that's how you should think of, in my opinion, that's how you should think of it. ATP is like little batteries. And again, your book points out energy transformations are essential for all life. That is one of the things that makes us alive, is this transformation of life. The next word for attendance is going to be related to this one. But instead of saying transformations, we'll say Transformers, like the movie or the toy. Transformers. And that is where we will end it. It's Friday. We'll end 5 minutes early. As soon as we get off here, I'm going to log on to the office hours, and I'm also going to post the link to office hours because I haven't posted it in a while, and I don't want you guys to have to go searching through all those old posts to find it. So before we log off, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, did you say that the exam was online or in person?
Great question. The exam will definitely be online. I do that normally anyway, but because of COVID, even if I didn't normally do that, I would be forced to do it anyway. So it's definitely going to be online. That being said, if any of you strongly object to having an online exam, you just need to contact me this week. This weekend, and we can work out some sort of alternate arrangement. But you have to do it this weekend. What I'm saying here is you can't just like sleep in on Monday and say, oh, crap, I missed the exam, and then write to me and say, I really don't think I want to take an online version. I want to take an on paper version. You can't do it like that. You need to contact me beforehand. And speaking of which, and I know you didn't ask this, and I know I already said this, but it's a good time to remind you, you only have 50 minutes to take the exam. At 8:50, the exam is over. You have to submit it. So, and the reason I do that is, well, first of all, because the class ends at 8:50. And second is because I don't want you taking an open book exam. So 50 minutes is not enough time to take 50 multiple choice questions and look every one of them up. So you don't have time to take an open book exam. So that being said, if you want more than 50 minutes, if you want to basically have an unlimited amount of time to take it, then you need to contact me this weekend so we can find a time for you and I to meet individually, one-on-one online, so I can see you and hear you and see your screen, right? So you'll have to have your microphone on and your camera on, and I'll need to see your screen, basically to make sure that you're not taking an open book test. As long as you're not taking an open book test, as far as I'm concerned, it could take you 5 hours to take the exam. I really don't care. But again, you have to let me know this weekend. You can't just change your mind, and people do this all the time. They'll forget that the exam was on Monday, and then they'll use some other excuse like that. Like, oh, yeah, I decided I wanted more time. So that won't work. Contact me this weekend if that's what you want. Great question. Any other questions?
Yeah, so as far as like when we take the exam Monday, are we just taking the exam and are we being on a Zoom, Google Classroom call, or are we just taking the exam?
You don't have to be. I will be here on Google Classroom, but you definitely don't have to be. So I'll be here if you need me, just like any other exam that you would take in person where someone, you might say, hey, I really don't understand what question 13 is asking, or, hey, did you notice, I don't know, question 17 has the same option twice or whatever. So I'll be online if you need me, but you are not required to be online on Monday. Great question. Anyone else? All right. Again, I can't say this enough. I've seen it so many times. I can tell who's going to do good and who's not by who does the study guides. Do the study guides. That's not going to guarantee that you're going to do good. But very rarely have I had people do good on the exams who didn't do the study guides. So do the study guides. And don't just go. I mean, you could just go through them. It's better than nothing. But actually read them and study them and think about them. Any other questions? All right. Well, good luck on Monday. Again, I'll be on for office hours, and then I'll be on again after office hours to do an exam review. My wild kids will be in the background, so I can't tell you how long I'll be able to stay on for the exam review. I'll do the best I can. Yeah, I guess that's it. So you guys have a good weekend, and hopefully I'll see you for the exam review. If not, just watch the video when I post it.
You have a good weekend as well.
Thank you.